Well, hello and welcome again to the Skillwork Forum. I'm Tim, as always, joined with my partner Brett here from Skillwork. On this podcast, just to level set everybody, we talk about skilled trades, everything in and around the skilled trades, and specifically about organizations that employ and looking to employ skilled tradesmen. So this is the second part of this podcast. The first part, we encourage you to look at that. We're talking about setting goals and objectives for 2024. In part one, we talked more about on a personal level how you set those. This one, Brett, we're going to talk more about organizational goals, how we set meaningful and measurable goals for your team, for your organization, your company, whatever level you happen to be leading in. The idea of creating meaningful and measurable goals, I think it starts personally. That's why we did that in the first podcast. But then how do you translate that to the team that you lead? And just like in the personal goals, we're still in the first part of the year. It's not too late to establish those goals for your team. And we're going to look at, some of the things that we do here in order to establish that, or what we've learned about how do you set goals and objectives for your team as you move into this next year.
Yep. So, I think it kind of starts, Tim, on kind of reflecting. And so I'm going to let you unpack here in a minute, because it's a piece of what we do that you really own and drive, and on the whole retros and SWOTs. I'll let you unpack that here in a minute. But just like our personal goals, when we talk about reflecting on things, you got to look at it. You got to go, how are we doing? You got to have assessments throughout, type of thing. This, we're talking a little bit combination of things. But I think it's similar. In a company, you tend to do some company-wide, which again, Tim's going to unpack in a minute. But on an individual level, the people that we lead and people that other leaders on our team lead, this is where I think those one-to-ones and if you do a mid-year or you do a year-end assessment, that's where a lot of the reflection should be happening. That's where you really should be guiding. That shouldn't be, as a leader, that shouldn't just be a check the box, in your organization. If you're really investing in people, and there's some great tools out there that can help you on that. Our friend Greg Harris, owns a company called, Quantum Workplace. They built a whole platform around, basically doing better one-to-ones.
Yeah, we use it here.
Yeah,
we're fans of it. So what you said there kind of, piqued something that I wanted to make sure I mentioned. As a leader, in our view, there's only one type of leader, that's servant leader. Anything else other than that, then you just got a position. So in my mind, it's lazy leadership when you're not setting goals and objectives for the people that work for you, giving them tangible things to work for, setting the pace. It's important that we set the direction going forward. And I think in order to do that, the first thing we'll talk about is the need to look back and see where you've come from, celebrate the past successes, but more importantly, what do we need to do to get better? What do we need to change? So here at Skillwork, we've adopted a lot of Agile methodologies. A lot of companies do Agile methodologies, maybe not as much in the manufacturing space, but the idea behind it is, broadly speaking, Agile methodology would say you perform better with smaller, self-organized teams that work on small, incremental, iterative chunks of work at a time. And so the more you break your organization down to small teams that are working on measurable chunks of work at a time, it provides a pathway to greater overall performance. A big part of Agile thinking is that for us, we do our chunks of work. And it may sound crazy to some people. Maybe it doesn't sound crazy at all, but we do them in 2 weeks. 2 weeks increments.
Yep.
Every 2 weeks, we're looking at what we accomplished, and all of that we're doing in those 2 weeks are based on overall objectives and goals. So at the end of those 2 weeks, here, everybody in this organization says, looking back over the last 2 weeks, what went well, what didn't go well, those 4 questions. What do we need to change? What do we need to keep doing? Those are the 4 questions. We do that at an organizational level every year, and you talked about it, Brett. When we lead this team at the beginning of our year, we do this organizational retrospective. We ask those 4 questions about the company. And then you mentioned SWOT. SWOT is an acronym. Many of you maybe have done these. Strengths, W is weaknesses, O is opportunities, and T is threats, SWOT. You look at these sectors and you bucket these things so that's more of a forward-looking thing. Where do we need to go in order to take advantage of our strengths, leverage some of those, minimize our weaknesses, and those sort of things. So we do these exercises as a part of our rhythm of our company. We just don't do them occasionally because it's something we read in a book. this is part of who we are, and it's become ingrained into how we do things.
Yep. Yep. And then, kind of coming out of that, and as Tim said, it's a rhythm. I mean, I think it gets back to that reflection, on an organizational level, the retro, the SWOT, that type of thing. A lot of companies, when they start, will do a SWOT analysis, and then they never do it again.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to do that consistently, really reflect on it, invite, different leadership voices to the table in that. That's how we do it. Obviously, we think it works well for us, and so, we're putting it out there. Kind of coming out of that, for us, that typically happens. Currently, we operate on an operational calendar year. We're actually changing that for a lot of, because of some of this, and so this in 24, our operational calendar will end in September, so these retros and SWOTs will start to happen more in that early September timeframe as opposed to December. So just doesn't really matter, just wherever that 12-month calendar. So this, for us, after the retro and the SWOT, then we do an all company, and we set the vision for 2024. So after the retro SWOT, some of that, we kind of take all of that, and then we set the vision. The Maxwell's 17 Laws of Teamwork book, says a team that embraces a vision becomes focused, energized, and confident. It knows where it's headed and why it's going there. So that's our goal too. So we go off-site, it's all company, and we really go through and we lay out our goals and objectives for the year. We don't just go, here's what they are. We talk about, in some cases, some of them don't need it, but in a lot of cases, we got some things happening this year that it required a why. And so we take the time when we lay that out to say, well, why is that an objective for this year? Why are we changing that? Because usually a lot of times objectives in an organization means you're changing something. And so we take the time to really kind of lay that out, answer the questions. And we don't, for our pattern and the way we do it, some things, the next day, they're rolling, they're up and going. But in some cases, we lay it out there, and the next day it isn't up and rolling. We got to let it soak in a little bit. We got to answer some more questions, and then we kind of begin to go forward in that. So we lay out everything from operational goals to our sales goals, focus, structure changes, to down to maybe some office moves or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, and I think communicating it and sticking with it, and we talk a lot here too about lexicon. And lexicon is just what terminology, an organization uses, and we're all saying the same thing. It's important here that everybody in the company understands for large strategic goals or 10-year goals, big rocks, all the way down to what we're doing, and put it in the right language everybody can understand. And then that needs to be pushed down to an organizational level within the company. And so these retrospectives and SWOTs go all the way down to our smallest team level size here, as well as just big parts of the organization that I oversee day to day, and Brett's as well, that we constantly are looking at those things with the goal to try to get better and realign, reorient ourselves, and reestablish goals and objectives based on that's one of the things about Agile methodology, the ability to adjust. You do these iterations, so you don't find yourself at 6 months going like, wow, yeah, we've been off track for the last 4 months. We quickly can adjust to where we need to. So it allows that. And, our company does, I feel like, a good job of vision casting, giving insight, and discussing those throughout the year. So for teams to set goals is crucially important as well. Again, align with the overall goals of the organization, then measuring them and how we measure those, and the approach that we use. This is where we've talked before on other podcasts about having metrics that matter. What are you measuring? The ways that you measure success, if it doesn't matter, then you're not going to measure. And conversely, something that does matter, you're going to measure. Mm-hmm. And so it's important for us to always have measurable goals out there that we can say, how are we doing? And again, we mentioned a little bit about Agile methodology. We're going to transition a little bit about that and discuss how we do goals in this whole idea of Agile methodology. Talked a little bit about sprint cycles. That's what you call your iterative work cycle. a sprint, and they're called a sprint because they're supposed to be short, and it's not a marathon, it's a sprint. And one of the things that is a little bit different in Agile methodology and sprints is, whereas companies and individuals set goals, in a 2-week iteration, we set commitments. So commitments are like, this is what we are going to do in the next 2 weeks. Everybody's on board. We've talked about what we're capable of doing, what our capacity is, what are the goals and objectives. Okay, for the next 2 weeks, we are committing to delivering this. And the reason and we are so hard over on commitments is because they're hard, they're fast, and they're something we can measure. And a goal is something that is hard sometimes. Things are out of your control as to whether you hit them or not. In a 2-week cycle, you should be able to commit and deliver. And allows a company to get consistency when you do that. So that's kind of some of the reasons why. And Brett, as you've kind of seen us adapt this and move this organization, what are some things that you've seen about Agile methodology and sprints and commitments and so forth that you see as being beneficial?
Yeah, I just think it's, as Tim said, you tend to react to what you measure. And I think I didn't have a lot of knowledge in Agile, my past before skill work, I came out of the manufacturing space, and as Tim said, it wasn't probably applied there as much. And so, Tim, had a lot of experience with Agile in his previous career and kind of brought that to us. And we've adopted it, I should say, to what we do. But I think, to your point, I think it's that ability to measure, reflect, or do a retro, adjust, and continue to do that. And the idea, we're getting ready, to even go a little further Agile in that we're going to smaller teams and to types of things, which I think allows us to have a higher level of focus. And so I think all of those things, being able to see it quickly, measure it quickly, adjust, a higher level of focus, I think those are the benefits that I see. I've become, while I'm not an Agile expert by any stretch as far as coaching it, I've become a believer in what it can do for an organization.
Yeah, and the idea about commitment and the team, and we talked about having self-organized smaller teams, and Brett just alluded that we're going more in on that, is the idea that they get together, and I don't come in there as a leader of these teams and tell them this is what you're going to do for the next 2 weeks, now go out and make it happen. I give them broadly, this is where we need to be at the end of this quarter. You guys get together and decide what you're going to commit to get us there. So there's buy-in, there's ownership, they figure out how to get better. There's a sense of achievement when they achieve the things they set out to do. So it's just crucial to us that we have this mindset of a commitment, all focused on achieving those goals. Mm-hmm. And the goals are set by the organization. We all get on board with them.
Yep. Yeah, I think, kind of next step in that conversation a little bit is then, one-to-ones, but not just one-to-ones, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute and get a little bit practical in an organization, but also the department leadership type. So there's your Agile teams, there's your retros, there's that group, and then there's this next group, which is kind of your department leadership, so to speak, and they're reflecting and challenging, and there's that rhythm as well for us. We do that bi-weekly, and we're going in there and we're going, hey, how are we? This was our goal. How come we didn't hit it? Those kinds of things. So there's some challenge or some healthy dialogue, hopefully, in those. Right. And then it pulls all the way back to those one-to-ones, and we've talked about it. You as a leader, as a servant leader, you've got to really check yourself there. Are the people around me growing or not? And so my rhythm, and there's not a right or wrong. Tim's is probably does his a little bit different, and he can share that on how he does. But my direct reports, my one-to-ones, I do more shorter, frequent touches. It's just a style that I've gone to. So with my direct reports, I do a stand-up with them weekly. I ask them the same 4 questions every time. What are you loving? What are you loathing? What are you working on? And where do you need my help? It's about a 15-minute, typically, stand-up. And then I do a quarterly 1-hour set down, and we get in a little bit deeper into those things. So that's my rhythm. I think all of that pulls us back to these measurable things. I've always said, nothing, we should never get to the end of the year, both as a company and as an individual that we're leading, there should never be a surprise.
Oh, right.
And so if you're doing your year-end assessment and that person's surprised by anything you have to say, then somewhere you either haven't been doing the one-to-ones or you haven't been doing them honestly.
Or you haven't had candor and you haven't been truthful.
That's right.
Yeah. So for me, I'm a big fan of doing them, and it's hard work. But again, Maxwell, 5 levels of leadership. You want to move up the leadership chain, recognize it is hard work. You got to be intentional. You got to give people valuable feedback. And I meet with my direct reports formally once a month, but informally as often as I can to check in with them on what they're doing. But in the formal session is that there is here's what I'm seeing, and there are about 6 or 8 different categories I look at. Then they provide, here's where they believe that they're working on, what do they need help with. I always end up with, I'm asking them, again, be honest with me, tell me how I can improve. How can I do my job better to help you? Give them the freedom to be able to do that. Everything should be aligning with the goals you've set out. In the middle of the year, I give more formal. Here's how you've done so far. With the objective of that, this is what you need to do in the next 6 months that you haven't done so far to get you where you want to go, where we want you to be. So all those are really important. Frequency, you can set your own frequency, but consistency. Think about the people you've worked for, that you've reported to, that you respected. I'd be willing to bet those people that you really thrived under challenged you, cared about you, connected with you, and gave you challenging things to work on. So setting one-to-ones that are aligned with your overall company organizational goals, whether you do Agile methodology or whether you do whatever your approach is, the same principles are in place. Put it out there, communicate it, have everybody speaking out the same language, and from the highest level objectives that are set by Brett and our company, he gets good input, but he sets the biggest rocks. We all then align with that all the way down to the individual. It all should be rowing the boat in the same direction. So just summary, look back, reflect, always look to get better. Be honest with yourself and your organization. It's great to pat yourself on the back. Spend about 5 minutes doing that and spend the rest of the time, okay, how do we get better? And then annual, quarterly, weekly goals and objectives. And there's a difference in my mind between a goal and a commitment. So that there's a nuance there, but those are kind of my thoughts. Any high-level thoughts before we wrap it up here?
You hit on those. It's the rhythms that we do. It's if you have no rhythm, then I would encourage you to get one or get some. And so because it is important, the reflection piece. The past is the best predictor of our future. So if you're not reflecting on it, if you just keep doing the same thing, so you got to reflect on it, and then you got to take action steps on that, and then you have to have these continual touch points. So, I think this, along with your personal goals and your organizational goals, there just needs to be a process. It needs to be consistent. And then, again, you got to be honest and truthful, both with yourself and your people.
Yeah, and I think something we try to do well here, I know you do, Brett, is the frustration point when you say, what are you low, what are you frustrated by? I've been in organizations where it's like, an email comes out, here's the goals, here's what you're doing. I had no input on it, and I don't understand them. Yep. So getting input is helpful, and making sure everybody understands a buy-in is crucial to go, especially if you're changing, which we tend to change a lot.
We tend to.
We're adjusting all the time. So that's it. Hopefully that's helpful to you. As always here in the Skill Work Forum, we try to put out content that's helpful and, not so much salesy, for lack of a better word, on skill work, but we'd be remiss if we didn't say, if a company like us who really values these sort of things and are focused on the skilled trade shortage in this country, if a company like us might be somebody you want to partner with to help you achieve your goals and objectives, we'd love for you to reach out, talk to us about that. Go to skillwork.com. You can reach out to any of us there. We want to give a shout out to a couple things. We have another podcast we sponsor here called The Proud Skilled Worker. You can find it here under all the places where you find this podcast. It's the voice of the skilled worker. We're really proud of that. One other shout out. We're proud to be sponsors of the Texas Boys Outdoors, which is an outdoor fishing and hunting show, which looks to give opportunities to disadvantaged military veterans, first responders, and their families to get out in the outdoors and hunt and fish. And we're proud to, once again this year, be a title sponsor of that show. So give them a look and listen. I think they're on Amazon Prime
Yep,
now?
they're on Amazon Prime now, and then they're also going to be back on Pursuit channel as well.
Awesome. Yeah, give Roy and those guys a listen. You'll be glad you did. So until next time, God bless.